The Earth was no longer the place that the peoples of the universe once admired as a unique center of life and intelligence. Now it was a shadow of itself, with burnt continents, polluted oceans, and ruined cities that had become dead monuments to the past. Memories of the planet's former greatness now remained only in old books and reports, the ones that the Orkan Empire didn't even consider important. The distant stars watched the fall of mankind, their ruthless armies, known for their incredible technological superiority and strategic acumen, destroyed everything that could threaten their empire. At first, it was an economic war, the conquest of colonies, covert manipulation, the slow but inevitable enslavement of humanity. However, when they decided to finally crush the Earth, they left nothing behind. A few months of hellish bombardment, the systematic destruction of all resources and bases, and then they declared final victory. The Earth was a dead planet that could no longer defend itself. But not all people gave up. The echoes of war echoed quietly among the dark corners of the galaxy, on forgotten space stations that had survived from the War of Independence, on the remains of old warships that fought for the truth in the last moments of the battle. The underground was hiding there. There were people alive there who refused to submit, but they were few. And while the orcs were relaxing in their victory, they did not realize that their greatest danger was the people who remained alive. At the heart of this underground struggle was Commander Adrian Phelps. Short, with dark hair and a sharp gaze, he became a symbol of hope for the survivors. Phelps was not just a warrior, he was a strategist, scientist, and psychologist at the same time. He understood that to confront such a powerful empire as the Orkan, one needed not just military strength, but a profound mental superiority, the ability to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. In these underground groups, people had little to boast about. Old ships, restored communication systems, lost scientific achievements that remained only on paper. But their greatest asset was not metal or technology. It was resilience, intelligence, and the will to win. They lived under oppression, in a world where even a day was a victory. Every small victory in the underground war was a promise that all was not lost. Nothing foretold that the next step people took would change the course of the war. If the Orkan could have looked into people's minds, they would have realized that humanity was not just trying to survive. People began to unite. They began not just to repair old spaceships, but to restore something much more. They were restoring the spirit. Phelps stood on the roof of a destroyed skyscraper against the backdrop of a burnt-out sky, and a city that had once been a symbol of prosperity. He looked at the old maps that blew across him in the wind. There was no sadness in his eyes. "We can still change the game," he said, his brow furrowed. His voice was calm, but determined. "If we can infiltrate their information networks, use their own technology against them, it could change everything. One successful move, and we can restore humanity to its former glory," replied his senior technician, Tess Jenkins. She was among those creating new strategies for guerrilla warfare. Phelps walked over to his desk and snapped his fingers. The technicians had already begun to restore the old warships. But their greatest value lay in their hacking skills. They weren't just underground fighters. They were hackers, crackers, tacticians who knew how to exploit even the smallest flaws in the Orkan systems. "We have to be shadows for them, and we have to act quickly. They think we're dead. We need to prove to them that we are not just not dead, we are also very dangerous." And at the same time, the Orkan were celebrating their victory. They sent space flotillas to new colonies. But their gullible hearts did not know that a war was already underway within their own ranks. A war that they did not even realize was going on. Meanwhile, in the limited space of the destroyed Earth, one plan began to be realized. Restoration is not only about matter. It's not just about shabby spaceship hulls rebuilt with spare parts lying in the backyard of old military bases. Recovery is about the spirit, about the mind, about the fact that people are able to find solutions even when everything seems to be lost. The underground did what seemed impossible. They turned chaos into strength, turned ruins into weapons. In the weeks that followed Phelps' announcement of his plan, a united network of guerrilla groups across the galaxy acted with tireless determination. They were not just a repository for technicians and soldiers. These were the hearts of the struggle. Old warships, stolen technology, and acquired information secrets all became part of the new strategy of humanity. All efforts were now focused on one thing: getting information. And that was the first big step in creating a deadly weapon. "We have to take what is ours," Phelps said quietly, watching one of the secret hacks his commanders were performing. Tess Jenkins, who had long established herself as one of the best in galactic hacking, worked nonstop. Her work was not just a technical process, it was a real battle. She was attacked from several fronts at once. The Orkan systems were compromised, and they were actively trying to find the hack. Jenkins was more cunning, however. "A new method will work here. We need to approach them with this information gradually. We'll hack the smallest sectors of their databases first, and then we'll strike the main blow," Tess said, her hands already dirty in dozens of open systems. What she meant was that the greatest advantage humans had was their ability to be unpredictable, allowing them to destroy even the best protected systems. The Orkan, despite all their technical achievements, could not foresee such a strategy. Every time their ships were attacked, they saw it as another small operation, devastating and unimportant. People acted in small groups, attacking the weaknesses of the Empire, taking important information with them. But this was only the first stage. The next step was to hit something bigger, to disable the main Orkan military equipment, as Phelps had planned. It was necessary to break their major communication lines, interrupting supplies. This was the principle of guerrilla warfare, to take everything and leave only emptiness. The operation was codenamed Phoenix. Everyone was to participate in it, from ordinary soldiers to the best engineers. Everyone had to contribute, whether it was a warship or subversive activities, whether it was on-site support or secret hacking operations. "This is our hour," Phelps said to his commanders as they stood in the shadow of the huge warship, now a symbol of rebirth. Technicians worked nearby, looking at their controllers, checking shells, refueling weapons as they were mounted on board. "This is only the first step, but it will be decisive. We need absolute accuracy because one mistake and we can lose everything," he continued, looking at the coordinates on the huge screen. Meanwhile, in the Orkan star system, on the Empire's huge command ship in the center of the planet, the Empire's chief strategist, Arzal, was reviewing the data on human attacks. He realized that these were no longer just minor random raids. Humans had become something much bigger. His mind refused to believe it, but the facts were irresistible. They had begun to open new channels of communication and operate on several fronts simultaneously. "This is a misunderstanding," Arzal said, looking at the reports. "Their tactics. It's impossible. How could they have reconstituted it in such a short time?" There was no room for doubt in his mind. The Orkan were confident in their invincibility, and such tactics were completely beyond their expectations. "They broke our codes. They broke our communications. How could this happen?" He almost growled in anger. And just when the Orkan thought they had everything under control, the human forces struck again. Phelps was not just fighting. He was changing the rules of the game. Every new maneuver, every small victory was a bitter lesson for the Orkans. Thanks to their hackers, who calculated every possible step, the humans managed to organize a series of attacks that damaged the central command networks of the Orkans. But this was only the beginning. The biggest shock was still ahead of them. People not only regained their strength, they became real warriors again. And now the Orkan had to see that this would not be a war on their terms. Rise of the Phoenix was only the beginning, and now humanity, under the guidance of its best leaders, was ready to snatch what was rightfully theirs. The enemy was sure that humanity had long been buried under the rubble of its own illusions, and they were right, to a certain extent. People remained only a shadow swallowed up by the ruins. They hid in forgotten bases, stealing every drop of energy, every opportunity. But it was this limited ability to survive that became their strength. Phelps stood on the bridge of his frigate, his gaze calm, but his eyes burning with determination. The whole team was working nonstop. Preparations were at their peak. Now it was not only about safety, but also about the chance to get the first significant victory. "So are we ready?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the screen, which displayed a strategic map of the Orkan star system. "All systems on board are activated. The ship is ready for battle," Tess replied, her voice sounding calm, but nervousness could be felt in her tone. She was the best hacker humanity had, but even she wasn't sure of the success of this plan. "Don't forget that we're playing in their league. If even one of us makes a mistake, we will be destroyed. We won't get another chance," Phelps added, turning to her. "I am confident in this plan. But if you've calculated even one weakness, don't be surprised if I tell you about it." Tess caught his eye and smiled, her confidence as cold as the determination of the plan. And your mistake could be our last. That's why I'm relying on you. They both fell silent. The decision was made and there was no more time to prepare. Phelps drew in a deep chest breath and turned back to the screens. Remember, the goal is not just to defeat the Orkan. The goal is to break their illusions. We are trying to convince them that we are capable of not only surviving, but winning. At the main command center, engineers worked to prepare the last details for the operation. One of them, Sergeant Michelson, approached Phelps. "Commander, we've set up all the disruptors. If everything goes according to plan, there will be no warships in the main Orkan fleet that can respond. It's a blow to their pride. And it will be something they will have a hard time forgetting," Phelps confirmed. But his heart was beating faster than usual. He knew this might be their only chance, and if they failed, they would lose everything. A few hours later, the frigate aboard which they had gathered all their forces was approaching the huge Orkan star station, which was to be not only an impressive stronghold, but also a major hub for their military communications. "It's now or never," Phelps said, looking at the shared map on the screen. "We need to get the signal up and running on all frequencies. Tess, are you ready?" Tess frowned, her hands clutching the controller's keypad. "We're ready. Launching now." She pressed the last buttons that would trigger the final destruction of all communication channels between the Orkan fleet. Soon, the frigate of humans broke through the Orkan station's defense system, and it happened so fast that the guards didn't even have time to adjust their systems to respond. The humans, using old but effective tactics, made their way through the field of mines and assault posts that the Orkan had set up to protect the important facility. "Everything is going according to plan," the commander said over the radio. And then the first victory appeared on the screens. One of the main Orkan defense installations was destroyed. The connection was cut off. Tess shouted into the radio, "They're not expecting this, here it comes." Her voice changed rapidly, and although Tess tried to keep her emotions under control, even her cold mind could not contain her excitement. This was the moment when millions of years of military practice of the Orkan Empire became useless. At the large Orkan base, the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. In their main command center, things were not going as planned. Technicians were rushing around trying to fix the communication systems. The Orkan's chief strategist, Arzal, realized what had happened. "This can't be happening," he cursed as he watched their communications network disintegrate. "They've penetrated every one of our defense lines. They hacked into our main network. How is that possible? They didn't have the power to do that," his officer asked. "They used our confidence against us, but that's not all." Arzal took over. "Get the fleet up. I want us to destroy them in one blow." But humanity was already ready. On board the frigate, Phelps gave his last instructions. "Leave them in the dark. We must show them that we are not just victims. We can hit them when they don't expect it." "Ready for the final blow," Tess responded. And then, as soon as the huge Orkan fleet rose to counterattack, it suddenly disappeared from the radar. The human ships, using maneuvers like in the old days, hid in the dark cavities of the asteroids. They began to launch surprise attacks. "Our advantage is not in numbers, but in cunning. They made a major mistake. They thought we were dead," Phelps said. The great battle for the Orkan star station began not with explosions, but with silence. Tess, hands clasped together, watched the monitors that transmitted data from the frigate. The first wave of the Empire's defense appeared on the screen, several large enemy ships ready for battle. They were no longer just military vessels. They were the pride of the Orkan. And it was this battle that could finally change the course of the war. "Is everyone in position?" Phelps asked over the radio, standing on the bridge. "If we don't get them off balance, we won't be here long," Sergeant Michelson replied, scanning the data on his screen. His voice sounded slightly nervous, but he knew his job. Today it was becoming clear. Either the Orkan would panic, or they would send people to the next world. "Don't worry, I'll give you a real show," Tess said, her voice sounding completely calm, although in reality she was completely focused. She pressed a few keys on her controller. Red lines appeared on the screen. She had hacked into another part of the Orkan systems. According to the plan, she had to disable several important parts of the enemy warships to make them vulnerable to further attacks. "Time for our little trap," Phelps whispered quietly, looking out the window at the huge Orkan station. But the Orkan did not give up. They became even more aggressive. trying to outrun the human frigates maneuvering among the asteroids. It was a classic Orkan tactic to move through the most dangerous areas to minimize the effectiveness of the enemy's maneuvers. "They'll follow us into a trap," one of the technicians said with joy, watching the enemy's movements on the screen. "We pushed them into it." "I hope they're not as smart as we are," Phelps replied with an ironic smile. Tess was busy with another hack when communication with another group of clandestines suddenly came in. "Commander, we found their fleet. They're mobilizing for a major counteroffensive. And not just one. We're sending you a line of defense. Hold them off, but don't cross the line. If we have to, we're going for their main blocks," Phelps replied, simultaneously giving orders to his subordinates. He knew that everything was important now, from every detail to every second. The men had to win. Otherwise, it would be the last battle. Immediately afterwards, the frigate became quiet again. People began to return to their places, adjusting their weapons to the required levels, carefully selecting weapons for the Orkan fleet. And then something happened that no one expected. The connection went dead, and the stars on the screen began to change color. Tess stepped away from the monitor for a moment. "We have them pinned down, Commander. It's time to get out of the trap," the voice on the radio said again. But Phelps did not respond immediately. He was staring at the screen. Suddenly he lost faith. Yes, the Orkan were not as flawless as they thought. Their fleet began to lose control again. Something had gone wrong in the heart of the Orkan command ship. Another human maneuver had caused the Orkan ship, which was key to the defense, to lose communication and begin to move chaotically. Phelps smiled. This was an important achievement. Now their Orkan fleet was uncoordinated. "Prepare for the final blow," he said. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. If we don't strike now, we won't have the chance." "The Orkan have finally cut off communication," Tess added, as the last moments of worry faded from her face. Her hands were already moving quickly, as if automatically. But then something happened that changed everything. Instead of gathering their forces for a counterattack, the enemy released their last reserves from their large ships, huge Orkan war machines that were supposed to attack the human from all sides equally. The battle was a big one. "They don't want to give in," said Mixon as fire began to break through the shielding aboard the frigate. He looked calm, but inside he knew every shot could be his last. "We are not just defending ourselves. We're in the middle of their defense." Phelps reacted quickly. "Get the power to the launchers. We're launching a massive offensive." Debris exploded around the people, and the Orkan ships launched their missiles to cope with the unexpected attack. And at that moment, when it seemed that the Orkan were spending all their energy on the battle, something else happened. A human frigate that had entered the burning zone suddenly threw up several maneuvers. "That was our trap, brother," exclaimed Michelson as the Orkan stopped their attack. Phelps put both hands on the table and looked at his men. "They got scared. That's what we needed. We've made them unpredictable." His voice was calm, but it was full of confidence. "Now they are confused." For a moment, everything was quiet. No one moved. And at that moment, when it seemed that the Orkan were about to collapse, a signal sounded to everyone aboard the frigate. "The Orkan lead ship is destroyed. We have won." Tess almost clapped her hands. "Looks like they're not as invincible as they thought they were." Phelps stood looking at the destroyed Orkan fleet and said quietly, "Not so fast. This is only the beginning. They will fight to the end. But we already know what to do." After that, his men returned to work with smiles on their faces. Now, on the battlefield, they were not just fighters. They became legends. Everything was in full swing in Xenon's orbit. The huge Orkan space station, protected by numerous warships, was on the verge of disaster. The human frigates, hidden among the asteroids, were ready for the final blow. "This will be our greatest battle. If we don't break them here, we can say goodbye to everything," Phelps said, looking back at the screens. Aboard their frigate, the tension was hard to breathe. "The Orkan main fleet is launching a massive offensive," Tess reported, hacking into some of their communications again. Her fingers danced rapidly across the keyboard, disrupting another line of communication. "We're waiting for them to pull up. Their minefield is our trap," Phelps replied. "We'll start firing when they get closer." As the Orkan drew near, the human frigates leapt out of the darkness, launching blast waves that penetrated the heart of the Empire. The fighting was fierce, with ships exploding and lasers slicing through the night. "The ship is south. Fall back," the commander of one of the frigates shouted as Orkan began to overtake them. "Not so fast," Phelps protested. "We're getting closer. Now they won't have time to react." And just when it looked like the Orkan were triumphant, the next turn changed everything. "We broke their shields," exclaimed Michelson gleefully. "They're panicking." The enemy ships began to maneuver chaotically, colliding with the debris, unable to react to the new attacks. The humans had gained a key advantage. "It's over," Phelps said quietly as the last Orkan ship blasted off into space. "We've done it." The Great Battle of Xenon left the impression that the Orkan had finally surrendered. But it wasn't that simple. The Empire only had time for a break. A few days after the destruction of their main fleet, a new, even larger fleet appeared on the horizon. This fleet was their last trump card. "This is not just a fleet. This is the elite of the Orkan," Phelps said as the huge armada appeared before them, a force that even the most clever strategies of humanity could not count on. The humans now faced the ultimate test, either victory or total collapse. "Damn it," said Michaels, looking at the screen. "It's like filling the orchestra pit at a palace. And who's going to play the instruments?" Tess, sitting at the panel, quickly set up a hack into the Orkan communication lines. "Let's not even give them a chance to communicate with each other," she said, her fingers running quickly across the keyboard as she tried to paralyze the enemy ship's control systems. "They're starting to turn toward us," Phelps said. "We're not giving them a chance to retreat. Full attack." The human ships, before they could even get a foothold in orbit, began to move. The Orkan, in turn, were not in the least bit slow. Their huge flagships, with extended shields, were moving toward the humans, firing at everything in their path. "If these are their elite troops, why are they firing so much?" one of the commanders asked, laughing when he discovered that the enemy had begun a chaotic attack. "What? Do they think we're afraid of some shiny space show?" "Don't underestimate them," Phelps replied, his voice becoming more serious. "They are ready to go all the way." Tess froze for a moment. The Orkan's communication lines suddenly started working again, and an ominous image appeared on their screens. Arzal, the Orkan's chief strategist. His expression was cold and menacing. "It was you, human, who interfered with our plans." His voice came through the comms with some kind of inexplicable satisfaction. "You took ours, but now we're going to take yours." "Blah, blah, blah," Phelps replied, pointing at Tess to reset their communication channels. Yes, I hear you. But this is your last chance to talk. Prepare to become history." The next moment, the orcs began to attack. Human frigates broke through the first waves of fire, choosing strategic positions between the asteroids. The explosions tore apart the space around them, but the humans did not retreat. "Shift to the left sector," Phelps ordered. "Keep up the speed. We have to break their shields." And at that moment, when it seemed that the Orkan would launch a counterattack, something happened that they did not expect. The humans, using a trick, began to shoot at the enemy's vulnerable points, breaking through their energy channels. "One more hit, and we can break their base," shouted Michelson over the radio. "Fire!" Missiles filled the space, hitting their targets. Arzal, sitting in his headquarters, saw his fleet begin to collapse. "What is this? Have they broken our defenses?" he exclaimed as the warning system began to signal severe damage. But humanity did not stop. Thanks to incredibly precise maneuvers and hacking attacks on key Orkan points, the enemy fleet began to lose coordination. They could no longer attack effectively. "That's it, Arzal," Phelps said, keeping his voice low as their last flagship crumbled into rubble. "Your armada is our victory." Phelps' satisfied look left no doubt. Humanity had not only won the battle, it had changed the rules of war. The threat of the Orkan Empire, which had kept the galaxy in fear for centuries, began to melt away. But every victory had its price, and humanity has only now begun to realize that the price will be very high. The Empire had not yet been broken, and Arzal, the chief strategist of the Orkan, was not giving up. His command center, located on a giant command ship, was incredibly well protected, with an arsenal of defense systems that were considered impregnable to any enemy. But now that most of his fleet was destroyed, he had no choice but to start a new game. "We will not retreat. This will be the last battle," he said, dismissing all doubt. His face remained unwavering, though his heart was beating faster. Every movement on the screen indicated that humanity was ready for the final blow. Phelps stood in front of the screen in the frigate's shabby office. His eyes burned with determination, but also with anxiety. Now their fleet was on the battlefield, and this was no longer just a simple bombardment. It was a battle for everything, for their home, for their freedom. The last Orkan flagship was still holding out until there was a chance for humans to deliver the final blow. Is everyone prepared? Asked Phelps, looking at Tess, who was sitting in the tech row, leaning over her monitor. Her expression was focused. Yes, but we have to be careful, she replied without looking up. The Orkan are not as simple as they seem. They have a few more surprises in store, and we will see them when the time comes. Don't worry, Tess. Surprises don't scare us. If they want a game, we'll play it, Phelps replied with a smile. But it was not one of joy, but of tension. The signal on the screen suddenly changed. The image of Arzal, whom Phelps knew well from previous clashes, appeared on all channels. His cold face and ominous gaze demanded a response. Humanity, you have never understood true power. You have only touched our power in passing. Now you will all be destroyed, Arzal said, his voice trembling with despair and anger. I have the power to destroy you once and for all. You forget one thing, Arzal. Phelps stood up again, his expression unchanged. You've already lost. You just haven't realized it yet. Tess had already activated the hacking of the enemy channels, and they were ready for another attack. All of their ships were looking for weaknesses in the Orkan defenses, and it all depended on whether they could do it before Arzal released his main ace, the last fleet he had been hiding until now. We have to do this quickly, said Mixon over the radio. Their main flagship is still alive, and if we don't act now, they'll launch a counterattack with a force so strong, we won't be able to withstand it. And then something happened that Arzal did not expect. Human frigates using the latest data from underground spy bases penetrated the heart of the enemy fleet. They didn't attack from a long distance as the Orkan expected, but rather launched a blitz attack. The humans stormed into the center of the enemy's defense, using their own tactics, maneuvers through asteroids, sudden turns and blows that forced the Orkan not only to retreat, but also to wreak havoc among their own lines. That's a move they didn't expect, one of the technicians exclaimed. We have them surrounded. But the most unexpected thing happened when Arzal began to realize that the situation was getting out of hand. His fleet had lost contact. All the maneuvers of the humans were so fast and unpredictable that the Orkan could not even predict their next move. This is impossible, he shouted, watching his ships being destroyed one by one under powerful blows. Fire from the explosions engulfed outer space as the human frigates hit the strategic points of the Orkan flagships. One by one, their main ships began to burn. We won, exclaimed Michelson as the final data appeared on the screens. The Orkan fleet had been destroyed, and Arzal himself had lost control of his empire. Phelps and Tess stood together on the bridge, watching the victory. So what now? Asked Tess, smiling slightly, but her eyes still serious. We're coming back and no one will laugh at us anymore. Phelps replied, his voice as firm as ever. It was a victory not only on the battlefield, but also in the hearts of those who felt they had always been too small for the great empires. Humanity was changing the course of history.